So today we're talking about how to develop, how to awaken inner power, which is an extremely fundamental subject. You know, whether one has ever thought about it in exactly those terms or not, it's still what all of us are struggling with all the time, which is a feeling of not being able to influence our own destiny and just being caught like a leaf in the wind. I used to feel before I came onto the spiritual path, which by good fortune and past lives, I was 18 actually, when I was first introduced to the idea that the inner reality was the deciding factor and the outer reality was not. It was how I responded, not what happened to me. And I was very energetic and made lots of things happen in my life, but when I thought about it later, the picture I had, and this comes from nowhere, I'm neither from a cold climate nor from an athletic family, but the game of ice hockey was something that I knew about. You all probably know that more than I do, where a bunch of big, bulky men have sticks, maybe women now too, but in my age it was mostly men, have sticks, and there's this poor little puck, and it gets whacked over here, and then the whole crowd chases it, and then somebody else whacks it over there, and there's just this tremendous amount of movement and excitement. But from the perspective of the puck, there's not a lot of reason as to what happens. You know, it's just basically minding its own business, and then a lot of stuff goes on. That's what I felt like. I felt like it was very exciting. Sometimes people were cheering, sometimes they were booing, you know, but there was always something happening, but I never had any idea where the energy was coming from, where it was going, what constituted winning and losing. It was just a complete muddle to me. So I was like anyone in their teenage years, I was just flailing around. And then I met the spiritual path through writings of Swami Vivekananda. I was telling some of this to you yesterday. And then not too long after that, I met Swami Kriyananda, who's a direct disciple of Paramhansa Yogananda. Yogananda's Indian, Kriyananda's American. American passport. He was actually raised in Europe. He didn't even come to the U.S. till he was 13. He never considered himself a citizen of any particular place, but his parents and his passport were American. But he spoke my language with my accent, you know, which always makes you feel more comfortable. You don't have to ask 3 times, what? What? You know, as I have unfortunately had to do when you all sometimes say very simple words to me and I have to lean over, and it's just because the accent takes the same idea and pushes it. But Swami spoke straight English for me. And he really presented to me, both in his person and in the lifestyle he presented to me, the possibility of taking charge of my own life. It's not that I had any great wisdom about how to do that, but even the very idea that I could take charge of my own life was just absolutely thrilling to me, you know? And I've been working on it now for half a century. I think I've made a little progress. It's a big job. So even today, when we have a very ambitious topic, you know, our inner power, let's consider this part 1. You know, we're just going to move in the right direction. Because once we have even an idea as to which direction we're going, honestly, it changes everything. When I read my very first book about Indian teaching, the year would have been 1966, not 1866, 1966. But it's not that I could do anything about it, but the mere fact that there was an actual direction. So what we'll talk about a lot today is just what is that direction, why, and why should you care? You know, because the very nature of an inner reality is that it has to come out of you. You know, I can give you the most cohesive arguments in the world, and my older brother, 3 years older, Well, let me back up just a little. I was raised in a Jewish family, and Jewish families have this certain way of communicating, especially intellectual, educated families like mine was. And the way of communicating is actually debate. I didn't know that till I was 50. I thought debate was conversation. I didn't realize that conversation is you lay something out lightly, somebody else can respond, I thought conversation was you gather all your arguments, you put all your best arguments on the table, then you wait and you see what the next person does. And my older brother, the state of Texas, which is one of the biggest states in the United States, 2 years in a row, my brother and his partner were state champion debaters. So if you think our dinner table was casual, you are mistaken. And he came by it honestly, I promise you. So I can lay out all the reasons, and I can do it very persuasively, but it doesn't make any difference. There has to be, the word is very simple, there has to be a hunger. There has to be some part of you that wants a different way of living. It's spiritual development, awakening, whatever words you use. It's a plant. It's a seed. Jesus used the phrase the mustard seed, faith like a mustard seed. Many interpretations are given of that, but a very simple and obvious one is it starts small and it gets big. But it starts small and it gets big because it grows, not because it's ordered to get big. You can take a small plant and you can order it to grow as much as you want. You can tell it all the reasons why it would be better off big and why you want it to be big and all these different things. It can't. Many parents, I remember this one poor mother, God bless her, her child was 4, and she kept explaining to me, how she wanted him to behave, which was as if he were 12. And I pointed out to her that he was 4. And the chances of him behaving like he were 12 were, let me think, 0. And that she might want to adjust her expectations a little bit. If you're a first-time mother and it's not that natural to you, you can get confused. But we treat ourselves that way. We're 4 years old, we're 2 years old in many key areas. Just because our bodies are big doesn't mean that we've actually grown up in all ways. But it won't do us any good. We can be as annoyed as we want. We can punish ourselves as much as we want. But the plant has to grow according. And if you skip any stage, if you say, well, we don't want you to be a little sapling anymore, we're going to just cut off the part where it's a sapling, and we're going to call you a tree, it doesn't grow. It shrinks, doesn't it, like that? So the first principle about awakening our powers is, who am I? Where am I really standing? What am I really capable of? And not what does the top of the mountain look like, but where are my feet? Because even if that's where you're going to eventually be, you can't get anywhere until you know what to do with your foot. So we want to talk in a very practical way. I was talking about accents a couple of years ago, or maybe it was this year. A group of us went to Japan. As it happened, Dambara was not on that trip. It was another musician. And there was a little bit of English in our Japanese audience, but not a lot. So we wanted people to sing along, so we had the bright idea we'd try that one. It had the English line, but the lura, lura, lero. Yeah, some of you are getting there. One of us, there was only one in our entire group who spoke Japanese, a woman named Chika, who actually was from Japan but has lived in India for the last 10 years. So she gets up to lead them and realizes, of course, that there's 2 sounds that Japanese can't make, L, and R. So we thought we were being so, helpful, and it was absolute catastrophe. and nobody, she should have told us, but she didn't tell us. So it was much more gratifying. We try. Fortunately, they all thought it was funny. too. So we were saved by that. And we'd learned some Japanese songs, so it wasn't impossible translated. Okay, back to where we were. I had a friend, an older friend, probably younger than I am now, but at the time he was older than me. And he was very interested, philosophically interested, up to a certain point. And he'd been a man, and he was still a man. He'd been a person who had made his way in the world. He had wanted to be wealthy. He'd wanted to be fantastically wealthy. He never quite made that, but he was comfortable, and he'd had successful businesses. He'd more or less done what he set out to do. And we agreed and were interested in each other up to a certain point, but we always came to this dividing line. And the dividing line was he felt that the external world and the events of the external world were basically the real force, and that I felt that the internal world was the real force, and that you adjust the inside, and not only does it give you the capacity to relate appropriately, but it actually creates the magnetism, the magnetic force that will actually influence external events. And we would come at it from all different angles, but invariably we would just reach this complete impasse. There was no way around it. External world is real, we adjust. Internal world is real, and we move through all circumstances from the inside out. The inside out is what I still believe is true, and it has a lot to do with a few simple questions, which is when we speak of ourselves, when we use a personal pronoun, what are we really talking about? Swami tells an amusing incident about his younger brother when his mother said something like, "Mine, this is mine," and his younger brother said, "No, mine is me, Robert." That's what, because Robert, the way he pronounced it, as a child, and he'd learned that when I hold up this cup and I call it mine, it belongs to me, Robert, like that. And so he thought the word mine meant himself. I mean, it was very logical. Children are extremely reasonable once you stand inside their unreasonable world. Given what they know, it makes perfect sense. So how could his mother use the word mine when mine only related to Robert? And so we think it's so adorable, how confused they are. I'll tell you, my first 16 years of spiritual life, I lived in a very rural area of California, about 2,500 feet. I don't know how to translate that into meters, in altitude, sort of moderate altitude, very country, very far from any urban areas. In fact, we were building a community from the ground up, so it was very primitive. And from where I lived to where I worked, we had this office building, which was not quite finished, but sufficient to keep the rain and the snow out. There was no heat in it, and it actually mild winter compared to you, but cold winter compared to us. There was no heaters in it. We had these little tiny heaters. But the wildlife lived, in and out of the building to a certain extent with us. I'll tell you a different story, but I'll show you the one I want to tell you. We had a big paper poster on the wall, and one day we took it down, and it turns out that a number of bats had made a home behind it. And when we took it down, the bats decided that they would explore the great new world around them, and they were flying all over the office. I'm not a wildlife person. I don't even much care for pets. I'm not an animal soul. So the bats are everywhere, and just some people think bats are attractive. I do not. And so we finally sort of thought we had settled the bats, and then I went back to my desk and I was writing like that, and this bat came from somewhere and landed like about half an inch from where my pen was. Amazing sometimes in the moment of crisis how we behave. I stood up without saying anything. There was a cardboard box nearby. I walked over, I put the cardboard box on the bat, and then I began to scream. But I did all of that in silence before I went hysterical. Okay, this is beside the point. I was just reminiscing about my youth. So I was walking the mile from where I lived over the hill, lovely walk to where I work. And I was, let me just think exactly. Oh yes, I know how it was. Okay, so I'm sitting at my desk, and in those days we had an electric typewriter, very high technology, and there was a little tiny spider. I looked at my typewriter, and this spider was there, and the spider was small, but he had attitude. I don't know how you can tell, but he did. He had attitude, and he just took his position, on the space bar. And then he came across here, and he sat there, and he looked at the view. He came down like this. And I'm sort of following him with my thumb because he's very small, and I have power. And I'm discussing with him the fact that his life is now in my hands, and that, everything depends on me, like this. Then all of a sudden, I picture myself walking from where I lived, and I could feel Divine Mother with her thumb over me, and I have attitude, and I think I'm in charge. And she's just saying to me, I could snuff your life out just like that. And so, oh boy, I picked up that spider and I took him outside. But it's all in our point of view sometimes, isn't it? What kind of power we have, what kind of power we don't have. I was in India, many times, but many years ago, we went up to Badrinath, which is this wonderful temple up about 12,000 feet. And on the way, you go through Josimat, where there's something called Deva Prayag, Prayag means where two rivers come together. And in the United States, where lawsuits and lawyers rule, there's never a place where human life is at all in danger. In India, where karma seems to rule, they're not so. They don't protect you so much. So there's this place where these two really big rivers come together, really big. So it's a huge, tumultuous thing. It's not just a little dinky. And then there's a little jut of concrete and a couple of stairs underwater so you can stand, and a chain you can hold on to, so you won't get swept away. And because it's auspicious to bathe where the rivers come together. So first of all, I was leading a pilgrimage group, and unfortunately we had a few really big, strong men and women, and I just said, you guys line up there and you hold on to the chain and you hold on to those people, because it did not look very safe to me. But I stood there, and I'm not suicidal at all, but I thought I could just step into that water and that would be that. That those rivers would eat my life, and just without a second thought. There are these powers in the world, whether you consider them natural or man or what, where just what is so precious to me, which is my personal existence in this body, could be extinguished in a heartbeat. The river would absorb me, and that would be that. I realized there would be enormous consternation behind me on the land, if my 30-some friends watched me disappear into the river and not come up. And it wasn't so much, as I said, that I was tempted, but I just couldn't help think about, it all depends on our point of view, doesn't it? When Yogananda was talking to Swami Kriyananda once, and he was talking like this. He was talking about our own clinging to the way things are, and the great force of time. How many lifetimes? Yesterday, to some of you, I mentioned a woman friend of mine who died of cancer when she was in her 40s. She died extremely courageously. When there was no hope, she just accepted it, no hope of staying in that body. But in the last week, she talked about thousands of faces going in front of her, every one of them having been one of her incarnations. And she thought, to cling to this body when there have been so many bodies, she said it just seemed, why would I do that? Like that, but just a moment, let me find the thought again. Oh yes, so Yogananda was saying, he just said it like this. He said, God eats people. And then Swami Kriyananda said he went like this. And we think, wait a minute. So a tremendous part of understanding awakening our personal power is we have to understand, who am I? Like, what am I? What am I trying to awaken? In other words, if we really want to have power, power isn't just, there's two ways to create force. Swami would often talk about this. If you have a hose and the water is coming out, you can crimp the opening. Just make it smaller and smaller, and then the jet becomes compressed, and there's a feeling of power. But there's no more energy coming through. You've just compressed it, so it's stiffer. Or the other way is that you find the tap, and you open up the tap, and you make the opening as wide as possible and increase the flow. So there are people will train you ways to be powerful by becoming more and more intense about me. There was a book in the USA, I hope it didn't make it outside, but it probably did. It was a bestseller forever. It was called Looking Out for Number One. And all of its instructions were how to take care of yourself. Sure, why not? Because I appear to be separate from you. You appear to be separate from me. You know, if you have 4 apples and I want them and I take them from you, it appears that I have more. But the fact that you have less, is that actually my reality? Are we so totally separate that your loss is not also my loss? So there's a lot of premises we have to think about here. What are my values? Who am I? What is real? You know? So the real way to awaken our power is not by hunkering down into I, me, mine, and thinking that there's no other mine in the world except the one that applies to me, like that little boy felt. Or do we attune ourselves to a much greater power than any of us, which is the divine power, the superconscious power, the infinite power? The vocabulary doesn't make any difference. I'm a devotee. I can think about God. I can think about Divine Mother. All these words really work for me. But I'm just trying to describe something that exists. The words I use to describe it are not the point. It's the fact that we are part of all that is, that our hearts cannot be isolated from the well-being and the feelings of others. And if we take from others in the idea that it will strengthen us, it's a short-term solution, if at best. But in the end, it does not serve us because it is not cooperating with simply with that which is. You know, we are, as human beings, we appear to be separate like the fingers on a hand. And if you're living at the tip, that's what it seems like. But when you get deeper into yourself and you come close to the source, then we begin to find ourselves matching everyone. You know, and this is where real power comes from. I mean, what would be more powerful, to live from here to here to here, or to live from here? What actually animates us? So from a metaphysical point of view, I mean, there's also other ways to think about it, and it has to do with the very simple scientific fact, which nobody disputes anymore, that the apparent separateness of everything in this world is really just an illusion, because it's all just patterns of energy. That's all that we're ever looking at. I came out of the psychedelic generation. I don't even know what happened after that. It was so long ago in my life. But way back then, when all of us, so to speak, were experimenting with those drugs, which were, I have to say, were very different than they are now. And, you know, Swami Kriyananda was confronted by a group of his hippie followers. And we said, you know, what do you think about these psychedelic drugs? And he says, well, basically I'm against them because changing your chemistry does not change your consciousness. It changes your chemistry and then bingo, you're back with your consciousness. But he said it did open people to a whole other way of thinking about things. In my own experience, which was very, very limited, but I did have a drug-induced experience in which matter dissolved into light. And I just stood there and I watched matter dissolve into light. I hadn't at that point read any metaphysical books or anything like that, but I just saw that what appeared to be solid was just patterns of light. And what it told me And even just that, I had such a strange life. I had never had even so much as a beer before I had a strong psychedelic, So I had basically one big experience, and that was pretty much it for me. But what it told me was the one thing I was looking for. Oh, if I change my consciousness, then everything changes. And that became, it did. It put me right on the path. So that I knew then what I was looking for. Everything dissolves into light. Now I've learned a little more, this much more, about science. And that's just the basic fact of things. We walk around as if it weren't true. But if we're going to really make deep decisions about how I should run my life, we have to pay attention to what is objective reality. And objective reality is no, you are not separate. And no, you cannot get your welfare just by doing what you want. And even the question of what I want, what I am I talking about? How many I's do I have within me? Sometimes this I gets up early in the morning, it does its sadhana, it does all its exercises, it meditates with great enthusiasm, and some mornings I don't. And nothing has happened in between. I'm not a different person. I'm the same I, because, there she is, always. But just sometimes it's effortless ease to follow the highest principles I know, and sometimes sometimes she won't. Fortunately, her bottom is not as low as it used to be. We sort of moved the whole thing up a little bit. But nonetheless, it's quite startling. So who am I? When I talk about my powers, what am I talking about? Which one of me is the one I'm going to put my energy behind? And metaphysically, when we start talking about the chakras, for me it's impossible to talk about any of these subjects without talking about karma, reincarnation, and the chakras, because that's who we are, basically. And we can also talk about the yugas, which is the planet itself and what it's doing. But our individual reality, the karma is that which we don't yet know. It's lessons that we have not yet learned about our own highest welfare, about who I am, about the nature of the universe. It's something I don't know. And so I have to have an experience that's going to teach me something. Now, people approach life in multiple ways. Everybody has karma because we don't incarnate on the material plane unless we have something to learn here. If we've learned everything the material plane can teach us, we don't come back. We either are merged with the infinite, the river reaches the sea and just dissolves in the sea, or we hang out on a higher dimension, the energy plane. But if we're in a material body, which, hey, we all are, so this is how you can tell, irrefutable evidence. It's because I need experiences through my body, and there's experiences I'm going to have that are going to challenge my concepts. And my concept, it's very simple. Yogananda summarized the entire spiritual path. 2 questions. What brings lasting happiness? What causes suffering? And if we review our own lives, we realize we never do anything except when we think, because we think, this way of being, this attitude, this way of relating to people, this pursuit is going to bring me more happiness and less suffering. In retrospect, a lot of those decisions were really stupid, right? But they didn't seem stupid at the time. And my happy little mantra is, it always seemed like a good idea at the time. Because it always did. Otherwise we wouldn't do it. And what do we consider learning and progress? Learning and progress in our life. It's when we try out something that seemed like a good idea at the time, we reap the consequences, and we say, maybe that wasn't such a good plan. Or, more often, we double down what we're already doing and think that instead of thinking about a new way to be, I'll just be more of what I already was. And that's karma. And we keep smashing up against the same thing, not even just for one incarnation, but for many incarnations. In fact, Yogananda said the reason that we reincarnate so many times, and you really don't want to know how many, let's just say it's a lot. There's a lot of zeros behind the number over here, it just goes on like that, is not because it's a total catastrophe. If human life were a total catastrophe, we would repudiate it quickly. We would be compelled much sooner to ask what is really going on here. But it's because it almost works. You know, like the husband was good, the house was good, the daughter was good, the son was a lemon. He was a bummer. So I'm going to have the same husband, the same house, the same daughter, but I'm going to get a different son this time. Or maybe the son and the daughter are great, but the wife was a lemon. So I'm going to get a different wife. Same house, same daughter, same son, you know. Or everything was perfect, except that my father made me go into his business, and I hated it. So next time, even if I have the same father, I'm not going to do the same business. Just little adjustment. And then we finally get it all worked out. Oh, and then the river rises and it wipes out my whole company. You know, so next time I'll live in the desert. You can see how we just keep trying to find a way to do what is impossible, which is I, and in this sense meaning my I, little, separate me, my personality, my preferences. We're going to take control. We're going to take control. And you see, it sounds good at first, doesn't it? You know, I can be strong enough. And we just keep trying to be strong enough. Until finally, you know, in one of our astral interludes, our guardian angel says, "Then how's that working for you? You know, flood, fire, famine, war, betrayal, disappointment, death. You know, how's your personal power holding out against those things? Huh?" And we can work with it two ways. And most people become cynical and atheistic. And I think we become cynical and atheistic first, until that becomes so sad that we just can't do it anymore. You see, we don't ever put out the energy to change until the effort to change seems less painful than continuing as we are. And you can never persuade someone to be different. You can give them all the reasons in the world, but if the present misery is preferable to the unknown possibility of what would happen if I let go of this, they will just hold on to it, and you will just hold on to it. My friend put it to me this way. She says, we're never motivated to overcome a delusion until we're absolutely disgusted with it. She said, don't even think about trying. As long as some part of you still likes it, you'll just hang out there. And this is what I was saying at the very beginning. Who am I? Where am I really standing? What is really possible? But there comes a point. I mean, I was born this way because of past lives, I know. I was born with this desperate desire. I had a desperate desire to help people, and a complete awareness that I didn't have any idea how to help people. I believe in many past incarnations, I had this same mouth on me. Yogananda once had, there's one of the early pieces of paper from his early work. He drew sort of little cartoon figures, or somebody did, of what people were like in terms of the emphasis, you know, and some people were big stomachs, you know, and some people were big sexual organs, you know, just depending on where their focus was. And I always thought of myself as this mouth with a little pair of shoes. Just going like this. I mean, the shoes were kind of cute. They had little bows on them, you know. Just carried the mouth around like that. I've been doing this for a long time. And I've persuaded people to a lot of things that weren't true. You know, revolutions, politics, God knows what. God does know what. And so I'm here, you know, telling you the other part of it. But let me think where we were with this. Just a moment. You know, there comes a point where we've had enough experience. And you see, we are equal. We are all equal in the eyes of God. We are all equal in our true nature, not in our personalities or anything else, but our essence. We're all manifested from the same form, and we all are equally loved and merged back into that same form. But realization is progressive. Awakening is progressive. And it's self-evident that some people are more awake than others. It's not hard to see that. It's just the way it is. I've been a vegetarian since I was 18, actually. And when I first became a vegetarian, my family was so alarmed because it was so uncommon then. Now it's very common. Now, even in the little bar in the hotel I am in town here, there's the vegan alternative with big arrows pointing at it, and the little fake meats in the refrigerator for breakfast. This is, for 50 years of watching this is amazing. This was completely unknown before, but now plant milk and everything is just the way it is. 1966, it wasn't. My family made me turn into the doctor a list of everything I ate, because they thought I was going to die. Fortunately, the doctor pronounced it the healthiest diet he'd ever seen and predicted that I would outlive them all. Not by a little, but by a lot, But for me, I've been so accustomed to being a vegetarian. I've lived in ashram spiritual community for decades. I was at a restaurant, and I go out to restaurants. I don't live in a cave. I was in a restaurant, and the table next to me, they all ordered steaks. And so the waiters come in with these, I hope I'm not offending anyone here. They came in with these big steaks and they laid them on the table, and there was a lot of, clanging of silverware and enthusiasm about these steaks. My mind said, in the privacy of their own home, maybe, but in public? It's just like, eating dead animals just right here in front of everyone. And I was so embarrassed for them. And I had to, pull myself back. They weren't the slightest bit embarrassed. This was perfectly natural to them. And first of all, I'm not that stupid. And second, I'm not that narrow-minded. Who cares? Let them have whatever food they want. But that's the smallest thing. It's like, what is the nature of reality? Many of those steak-eating people might be much more generous and God-inspired than many vegetarians I know. So I'm not drawing that kind of a thing. But people just choose what they choose. And so do we. So we have to understand that this is progressive, is what I'm trying to say. And we have a deep desire, some of us, to just understand life on a level that a lot of people are just not even asking the question. When I was 18, I was working, or 20 maybe, I was working in an office as a secretary. I never had any profession. I didn't have any education to speak of, and I was just doing some clerical job. And there was a young woman in the office with us. She was getting married, and everything about her wedding was out of a magazine. She just had all these different magazines. And I thought to myself, but this is so personal. How could you just be taking it from magazines? But I realized that was her life, That just she didn't start from the inside. She started from the outside. And to me it was literally unthinkable. I just couldn't imagine doing it. But to her it was perfectly natural. I wasn't as generous in my heart as I am now. Now I would have turned the pages with her and pointed out the things that I thought were pretty. If this is what she wants, this is what we have to work with, and we move step by step. I'm saying all this because it doesn't help us to affirm a reality that isn't yet ours. And part of the difficulty of really finding our inner strength is that we tend to resist the actual where we stand. I like everyone. It took me many years. I didn't even realize, the gap between my authentic self and the self I was trying to put forward. And I'm a pretty straightforward person, but I didn't even know until this was my This was my thinking for the first 12 years on the spiritual path. 12 sounds like a lot, not so long from where I'm standing, but it was a lot at the time. I always thought that there was a much better version of me. And if I just continued to bully this one, at a certain point, I know this is crazy, but this is what I thought. She will say, ha ha, big joke. She'll go open the closet and the perfect me will come strolling out. Like that. And it was nearly, almost exactly my 36th birthday when I just had this, what was both the most terrible and the most liberating realization. This is it. There is no better version. This is the one that I have to work with. And it's not that I lowered my expectations at that point, because that wouldn't be fair, because the expectations I had didn't exist. They were just a fantasy. I just saw that if we're ever going to get anywhere, we have to stand where we're standing. And instead of measuring myself against something that was unreasonable, I started actually asking, who was I? And I started playing a game with myself that I've played ever since, which I highly recommend. Every death and return experience seems to include a life review. And you sort of look over what you've done. And one of the characteristics of almost all the life reviews is that those who are reviewing you are really nice to you. They're not mad at you. They're supportive of you. And they cheer you on. They're your friends, in other words. And we tend to think of ourselves as always being judged because we're the one doing the judging. And so at that age, at 36, I made this decision that I would measure things in terms of my life review. But even then, I started and I realized, let me think how to say it, that even if I never realized any of my potential, I was already a pretty nice person. I didn't think I was a very nice person, because I wasn't, but I was a pretty nice person. On the balance, I was more nice than not nice. I had my days, because a mouth like this in a family that debates, where your mind and your mouth work too fast, can get you in a lot of trouble. So I was a pretty nice person, right? But I practiced dying, standing in front of my guru and my teacher, and saying, well, this was it. Could have done more, but it wasn't a dead loss, was it? Perhaps dead loss is not the right word in that context. But it was an amazing liberation. If this is my last breath, and the next thing I know I'm in the astral world, and I'm having to review this life, the phrase I come to, can I die on what I've already done? And if I do die on what I've already done, can I just stand there in peace with it? Maybe I didn't do everything I was supposed to, but it wasn't a loss. It wasn't overall, it was a plus. And I love reincarnation. I'll have another chance. Whatever I didn't finish, I'll get to do. Some people think reincarnation is a burden. I think it's a help. Because that just means I have all the time in the world to work this out. And so the question simply is, what strength do I have right now? How much can I face? How much can I shift? And what we also have to understand about that, and since then I've done a lot more things that I didn't know that I would be able to do. Written primarily that giant book back there, Light Bearer, which is a huge biography of Swami Kriyananda. He assigned me that task when I was 24. I published the book when I was 72. Every single day I worried about it. Actually, until I was about 68, because that was when I really saw that I was going to be able to do it. Once I finished that book, I have 4th stage cancer, no chemo for me. I'm just, I'm done. I can die on that book. It's heavy. I don't know if I can carry it to heaven, but, I can do it. But I was content before that. Okay, if you want to have any power, you have to be at peace. You have to be in right relationship to your own potential. You cannot be at war with yourself. Many people think that the way to get strong is to constantly be at war with yourself. But what you're doing is you're just dividing your energy. Think about it as if you were your own mother and you were a 4-year-old child. And the little child, my nephew, was very gifted musically. He eventually took up the saxophone. But when he was really small, they started him on the violin. And he had such musical memory. I remember when he was 6, he sat down and improvised at the keyboard. I mean, it wasn't merely that he was a prodigy. It was beautiful. He was just playing. He just knew where the notes were and he could just play. But he couldn't play the violin that well because he was small and it was young. And finally, his mother found him crying one day. And she said, what's wrong, dear? He said, if I'd started on an instrument easier than the violin, I would be in the symphony orchestra by now. Because of his memories, of who he'd been in other lifetimes. And this little body, these little fingers didn't know how to do it like that. But if we're our own mother, what do you say when we claim, I should be perfect in this way, I should be able to do that, I'm still attached over here, why am I so unsympathetic, why am I so easily hurt? You can't just say, well, you should be different. That's not going to work because you're on both sides of that question. So Swami Kriyananda put it this way, and it's an odd technique, but he said, if you doubt yourself, if you're against yourself, he said, keep lowering your standards and your self-image. He said, keep lowering them until you finally fight back and say, well, I'm not that bad. That's how I got to be a pretty nice person. I wasn't productive. I wasn't really very competent. I could still talk. I could always talk. I could talk, and I had some good friends, and then sometimes I was naughty. But I ended up a pretty nice person. And if I made myself worse than that, no, actually, I'm a pretty nice person. And once you have solid ground, and you also have to have that solid ground in terms of your faith and your understanding. You can read great books about great things, but what you can kind of spin in your mind is quite different than how you respond in the moment. When there's these wonderful stories about a woman named Corrie ten Boom and her sister Elizabeth, Betsy. And the book is called The Hiding Place. They were Dutch Christians who helped a great many Jews during the Second World War. And eventually, Betsy and Corrie, who were spinster sisters, and their father, they were all arrested. They were betrayed and arrested. The father died immediately, and Betsy and Corrie went on. But Betsy died finally, and Corrie lived through it. During the interim, when they were helping Jews escape from Holland at that point, they took a lot of Jewish people into their own little flat. And they were a very obscure family, watchmakers. And the Dutch house was built in such a way there were lots of nooks and crannies, the hiding place. So they built a hidden room, and they lived in the house, but they always were prepared to be raided. And everybody who was hidden there would get into this hiding place, and the hiding place was on the other side of the wall where Corrie slept. And Corrie said about herself that she tended to sleep really deeply and wake up, it took her time to wake up. So they did all this training. Their young nephews and nieces helped train them, and they would wake her up in the middle of the night as if they were the guards coming, and would shout at her, where are the Jews? Where are the Jews? And when they first woke her out of sleep, she would say, behind the wall, which was not going to work at all. So they kept training her to come out of a dead sleep and say, what the heck are you talking about? How would I know? Just immediately to have that be her very first response, right? And gradually she actually trained her subconscious mind to redefine herself, just redefine herself into something else. So what you do with your intellect, what you spin, what you can say, what you can explain, when you're challenged and you give all these highfalutin explanations, is quite different than when you're woken from a dead sleep. Who do I think I really am? So what we have to build our faith on, who do I think I really am? You know, there was a situation where there was a very, very false lawsuit filed against Ananda and various people, and this woman really perjured herself and really did a bad thing, super bad thing, in accusing us and me and various ones of us of very bad behavior, which we were not guilty of. But she had a good lawyer, we had a bad lawyer, was a bad judge, all these things happen. So at the end of it, we're sitting here, we're getting the verdict. Verdict goes against us and goes in her favor, like this. And I'm so proud of myself. The first thing I thought was, oh my God, you poor soul. I thought about the woman who won. I said, not only have you lied about this, but now you have won. And you're going to get all this money, and you're going to go away. And I said, how many lifetimes is it going to take you to work this thing out? I mean, how much suffering are you going to have before you realize what you've done? And that just came right out of me, you know, and I thought to myself almost immediately, good girl. Because there were so many other possible things I could have said and had said up until that point. But in that point, nothing but compassion. You poor soul. In a similar, far less serious way. If you're in a leadership position, and I don't mean to intimidate you if you have anything to say. People say the damnedest things to you. That's all I can say. This man came to me, and I think I told this to some of you. Forgive me if I have. But he was part of our temple, and he came to every program because he was a musician, and he had to be there. And he walks up to me one day, and he says, you know, a lot of people think you're inspiring, but I don't. And I thought and at that time in our temple, I was basically the only one who talked. And my first thought was, oh, you poor man, I said. It must be terrible for you. I talk all the time. And again, it was like, good girl. You know, there could have been so many other things to say, but instead of any of them, all I could think of was his reality. You know, and I tried to think, what could I do? We need you as a musician, and you like to sing. And it wasn't this gentleman here. But you see what I mean? Like, what do we really believe in? What is really true? And we need to back up as the starting point for strength. We have to stop being at war with ourselves. We have to stand where we actually stand. And we have to make our faith what will really spontaneously come out of us. Now, some people resist this. They think, well, I don't want to just hold myself to what I already am. No. This is your starting point. Because if you're standing on firm ground, you can build something from that. If you're always hiding from what the reality of what you are is and putting this facade over it, there's just this enormous space that makes you extremely tense, and it's very hard to build anything because you're working out somebody else's karma over here. You're trying to work on these lessons when these lessons are the ones that you really have to. And then, based on what you actually know to be true, then you start finding the techniques and the attitudes and the teachings that actually match you. And you'll find that your progress really begins to flow at that point. And to just be, I don't know, unafraid in the presence of God. I would say to my friends sometimes, you know, it's much better to sin enthusiastically in the middle of the road, you know, than to be secretly ashamed in your house. I say a lot of things that are kind of strange. It's the little mouth walking around on the shoes with the bow. I worked for Swami Kriyananda as his secretary for 3 or 4 years when I was first there. And, you know, I was very emotional. And I was in one of the small public places of our community at that time. And I do not know what I was irate about, but it was something. And I was making a fair amount of noise with my mouth about something, just speaking loudly and forcefully about something. And someone came up to me in this way. You're Swami Kriyananda's secretary, and I don't think you should be behaving that way. I had no patience. This is why I'm only pretty nice, not real nice. I said, well, I am his secretary, and this is how I'm behaving. And I mean, they were right. I wasn't right, but really, don't talk to me like that. This is what is. I cannot begin to tell you how much that will increase your personal power if you stop being at war with yourself. Just stand there with that. Okay, maybe I should take a few questions. We'll have maybe half an hour before we break for lunch. So, yeah, okay, definitely. Okay, yoga is specific practices that start with where we are, for being incarnated in a human body. How do we work with the energy of our consciousness and the energy of our physical form in order to gradually awaken us to higher and higher levels of understanding? It's higher levels of understanding in terms of what actions cause what results, what behaviors bring what results. In other words, attitudes and actions that decrease suffering and increase happiness. It's also working with energies in order to expand our perception of who am I? Am I just a physical body? Does my consciousness exist outside of the physical body? What are the laws, the natural laws, the divine laws that govern my experience here? So yoga is the science of systematically working with attitudes, with energy, with the physical body, with the mental body, with the spiritual self, with the energy form, to direct everything toward greater awareness, which leads to less suffering and greater happiness. So then within yoga itself, there are different temperaments. There's the karma yoga, bhakti yoga, jnana yoga. Okay, what they are is karma yoga is people who are active. And therefore, karma yoga is about being serviceful. I personally am primarily a karma yogi, which is why I travel thousands of miles and I talk so much. Because the way I work with the way I am is that if I'm generous and serviceful and attuned to others, it helps awaken me and puts me more in tune. Bhakti means devotion, that we go primarily by feeling, and therefore we think about the divine as mother, we chant, we sing, we dance. We do those things that awaken the feeling of the heart in an upward way, not in a restless emotional way, but that gather that energy and lift it upward into the spirit. So devotion, opening the heart, is a very fundamental and powerful practice because what we actually act on something when we have a feeling about it. Think about that. You can, as they say, you can live across the street from the best restaurant in the city, but you'll never go in there until you're hungry. So it doesn't matter how attractively it's described, you have to have a longing for it. That's what I was saying earlier. You have to have a longing for awakening. If you don't, people can be very, very interested in the spiritual life, and it's all philosophy, but nothing in them longs for it. So they just think about it. They never do anything. Bhakti yoga deals with opening up and activating the feeling dimension. And the truth is, these are not separate. They all go together. The reason I like to serve is because of how it feels in my heart. And I feel closer to Divine Mother when I get to share all this wonderful news with all these wonderful people. And if I didn't feel it so deeply, I wouldn't do it. So it's all together. Gyan yoga, gyan is wisdom. And the wisdom aspect of it is to understand. People emphasize the importance of the heart, which is valid, but the heart and the intelligence have to work together. If we just have a heart that's always going with feeling, it often gets really led astray because it feels right, but there's no intelligence applied to it. Gyan is the intelligence, but intelligence guided by an actual understanding of divine law. We're operating under divine law all the time. We just don't know it. If we went up to the top story of this building, looked down and said, I don't believe in gravity, I'm just going to step off the top of this building. Well, divine law is going to cause your body to plummet to the ground, because it doesn't matter whether you believe in gravity, gravity rules. And so we say, rebellious youth also says, people say that, heroin is not good for you, but I disagree. I mean, you can disagree all you want. It just is what it is. And if we can say, well, I'm going to be selfish and I'm not going to pay attention to your feelings, I'm just going to be true to myself, well, other people are not going to like you, because there are divine laws that will take place, and you can have all the opinions you want. Gyan is to understand what those divine laws are, their impersonal purpose, and then understand how to operate in cooperation with them. So those are the three. And then Raja Yoga. Raja means king, and Raja Yoga is the royal highway that brings it all together, in which Bhakti, Karma, and Gyan Yoga cooperate with meditation, with understanding that I exist independent of all outer manifestation, and the more I can explore and experience that inner self, the more powerful I will be. So, for example, Swami Kriyananda has a course, and because so many of you, thank God, can understand and read English, the reason, not that you need to read English, but not all of our material is available outside of English. His Raja Yoga course is a very comprehensive course that talks about all the yogas and how they play together, and also teaches meditation. Now, within Raja Yoga, there are different rays of grace, is actually the way you would think about it, different masters, and often they teach slightly different things. They're not really teaching anything completely separate, because everybody has to cooperate with divine law. Any guru or master who arises and said, I've just figured out something really different, concentrate on your left heel, wave your right hand like this, it's not going to work. They all fundamentally send you inside. They tell you to raise your energy. You concentrate, you use the breath. There can be nuances of differences, but if they're too radical, be distrustful, because we are made the way we are. If somebody tells you that gravity doesn't apply to you, it's a dangerous principle. So the word kriya actually simply means action. It's a very neutral word. But when Yogananda incarnated and was sent to the West by a line of gurus from the Himalayas, most notably this ever-living guru named Babaji, which simply means revered father. Baba is father, J.I. is respect. Babaji has no real name. And it's like this is the time when the spiritual responsibility is being transferred from institutions to individuals. And it's a very chaotic transition, because society was used to depending on institutions. I see it here. I've been in Italy and in Spain, where the Catholic Church has ruled forever. And, every town has a giant Catholic church, and the Catholic Church was the whole center of everything, and it isn't anymore. And for generations, everybody got their moral values from that institution and their spiritual understanding from that institution. Now that influence, because of what's going on the planet, is beginning to wane. And this influence, self-realization, from many different sources is coming in, which says it's your own experience, it's your own responsibility. This is what Yogananda said. Your spiritual life belongs to you. It does not belong to a dogma, it does not belong to a priest, it does not belong to a temple. It's up to you. And you experience the presence of God and your own consciousness in relation to that by interior work. Kriya Yoga is a specific way of meditating that works in a very profound and simple way, but very profound, with the energy in the chakras. And the chakras, the energy pattern in the chakras is our consciousness. So it gives you direct access to shifting your consciousness. it's also a whole way of life, meaning if self-realization is the goal, if meditation is the practice, if all these aspects of yoga are true, then what about everything else? How do I make any decision in life? So there's a whole Kriya Yoga way of living that is not a dogma, but if this is your focus and this is your practice, how would that relate? That's why Swami Kriyananda wrote 150 books. He wrote about money, he wrote about art, he wrote about marriage, he wrote about children, he wrote about health. Because if this is the practice and this is the goal, what does everything else look like? And that's why I was joking earlier, but should these buildings be black? If self-realization is our goal, is black the best color for the building? And I'm joking, but I'm not. Is the box the best architectural style? Swami wrote about architecture and about interior decoration because everything changes. Now, many people speak of Kriya Yoga because Kriya means action. So many spiritual lineages have Kriya. So this particular lineage was brought into modern times by a master named Lahiri Mahashaya, who got it from Babaji. So to be accurate, you say the Kriya Yoga of Lahiri Mahashaya. But it's, any word could have been used. And Yogananda, they chose deliberately a generic word rather than a unique word because they wanted us to understand this is just like gravity. This is a particular articulation of it that strikes many of us powerfully. It's a particular line of grace because the role of a guru and a disciple is also integral to Kriya Yoga because it's integral. It's one of those divine laws. So this line involves this line of masters, but the technique is a divine law. But the grace comes into it. Is that sufficient? Kriya itself, the actual technique, it's a little bit like you can't start in the first grade with calculus. You have to sort of learn some of the other mathematical rules first. So Kriya is meant to be freely given, but it won't work for you unless you have a little bit of groundwork under you. So our way of doing it is to make that groundwork very available, and if you learn the preliminaries, so to speak, then the initiation is open to you. In Autobiography of a Yogi, Yogananda makes Kriya extremely compelling. One round of Kriya, which is an inhalation and an exhalation, is equivalent to 1 year of right living without the danger of not only working out karma during that year, but creating more. So Kriya is a little more efficient, for working your way through all these things. Okay? Yeah, it's a good question and worth answering. Okay, another one. Now, you asked me the question yesterday about heart and soul. And the way you articulated it to me was that in another line of teaching that you've studied, the heart and the soul are considered to be the same thing. But make that more clear to me because I couldn't follow it. Mm-hmm.
And I struggle with that.
Yeah, I would struggle with that too. Fortunately, I don't know what line of teaching you're talking in. Don't tell me.
No, I won't.
No, it's better that I don't know. So I'll answer it. Okay. Swami Kriyananda and Yogananda teach a great deal about the chakras. The chakra, okay. The chakra is the blueprint, so to speak. This building has a blueprint. Somebody had an idea for this building, and then they translated that into a blueprint, and then everybody followed the blueprint, and it was manifested as this building, right? And from the idea of it, they had to apply a lot of energy to it. The idea is the causal realm. I mean, these are very subtle ideas, but you can see them also here. There is literally a causal realm, which is just the realm of ideas. There's the astral realm, which is the realm of energy. There's the material plane, which is the one that we're inhabiting right now. And if you think about how anything is manifested, it's easy to have ideas. But in order to manifest an idea, you have to apply energy to that idea, and you have to apply enough of the right kind of energy for it to manifest. And many of us suffer in life because we have lots of ideas, but we don't know how, or we're unwilling to apply sufficient energy to them to manifest. So we feel very frustrated. And this is among the many karmic lessons that we have to learn, is we have to learn what kind of energy is required to manifest an idea in this world. So in our experience, having been somewhere along the line, we were manifested as individuals. And why that ever happened, I have no idea. If God ever asked me if I thought it was a good idea, I might have an opinion, but he's never asked me. So we find ourselves here. How we got into this situation, who knows? But the most important thing is, what do we do about it now? So the idea of ourselves is there, and then there's the energy pattern, because everything in the world is in three pieces. As I was saying, there was an architect had an idea, he made a plan, they put enough energy into it, now it's manifested. So we have an energy blueprint, which is what is followed when we manifest in this world. I mean, that's why you came to this country, or came to this country later, or were born here, or were born to certain parents. You have a certain look, I have a certain look, a certain context, because there was a blueprint, and that blueprint is the chakra system. It's the energy that flows from the top of the head to the base of the spine, through the center of the body. It goes through the center of the body, and it's a magnetic force like this, and that's the beginning. And then there's 7 chakras from the crown to the base of the spine. The 5 chakras from the throat to the base of the spine are really our personality and our human life. And the point between the eyebrows and the crown chakra I'll speak of in a moment. So those chakras, there's many ways to talk about it, and I send you to my YouTube channel, type in the word chakras, and you'll find so many classes, you'll really wish you hadn't done it, okay? Each one of those chakras represents an aspect of consciousness that is required to make an integrated life. So every chakra is important. That we speak of the lower and the upper chakras, but for the purposes of this discussion, that's not the point. The first chakra, the root chakra, the earth chakra, that represents the need for security. And everybody needs security. So at each chakra, there's a quality that's required, and we have to make a decision as to whether we seek that quality outward in the world or inward in consciousness itself. So we all need security. So is our security our faith in God, our belief that Divine Mother is in charge, that we are unconditionally loved, that life has a purpose? And that security, you see, is completely inward and not dependent on circumstances. Or do we seek our security by the support of others, by having people obey us, by having power in the world, by having money, by having a big house with big furniture, that's heavy, that's going to stay there and make us secure? But it's all of it is seeking security. Which direction are we looking? The second chakra is creativity. It's also, because it's related to the sexual organs, people talk about it as sexuality, but it's really creativity and inspiration, and the constant need to find ways to be inspired. The most simple way is physical union, just to find somebody and have that intense experience. But the deeper level is creativity and that kind of expression. Now, do we seek that in the ever new experience of attunement with the divine, or are we constantly, restlessly looking for something outside of ourselves? The third chakra is personal power. Again, do we draw that personal power from our relationship with a greater reality, or do we express it by trying to make other people obey us, inward, outward? But the power is still needed. The heart is our likes and dislikes. It's our feelings. And I was saying earlier, we never do anything unless we're motivated by some feeling. This is the basic male-female. And I'll use yin and yang, because these days if you dare say men and women, it gets very confusing. So I'm going to say yin and yang. Yin is the receptive feminine side, yang is the masculine side. There are men and women because there is yin and yang. Yin and yang is the divine principle, and as a result it manifests as these complementary genders. Yin and yang is perfect because it's a perfect circle, exactly equal. It's just the two balancing sides. So, let's see, why would I have said that? Just give me a moment to remember. So we're feeling. So this is the idea, that the masculine side of us speculates and thinks. The female side feels. I mean, within us, it feels to do something about what we think. Where the masculine can just think all the time and do nothing, the feminine will say, do something about it. That's why the expression, which nobody likes anymore, behind every great man, there's a great woman. What that means is behind the masculine, there has to be the feminine. Behind the thought of it, there has to be the feeling that moves it. Anybody of any gender can be yin and yang, but both have to be in place. I've watched in relationships between men and women, for the relationship to work, there has to be a yin-yang balance. It doesn't matter which side of it is presenting which side of it, but for the relationship to work, there has to be yin and yang. And I also see that sometimes couples will get in the habit of tipping too far in one way or the other, and if nobody picks up the difference, very yang couples, two career, strong, ambitious couples, nobody cooks. Nobody takes care of the home. And so everything begins to tip like this. Or the yin couples, everybody just hunkers at home, and nobody ever really comes out the door and does anything. You have to have both sides in order for it to work. It's about us. If we work it with partnerships, that's one thing. But the point is the feeling nature is essential, because without the feeling nature, nothing else will happen. Also, Yogananda said, and it's absolutely true, reason follows feeling. Whatever you are prejudiced, whatever you want to believe, your mind will support it. And that's why sometimes people talk about the heart is the most important, because if the heart is leaning one way or another, the rest of you is going to get sucked into it. This is why, for example, somebody you know well can be a flaming alcoholic, and everybody knows it but you. Because what would happen, I'm too terrified to actually think about what's true. My feeling of fear is so great that my mind is completely blinded. And when you finally wake up to it, if you ever do, it's like it was always so obvious, but my heart wouldn't let me know it. So the heart also is a little bit dangerous, because if it's accurate, chitta is the heart, and chitta is is consciousness itself. So the heart can also be magnificently accurate. Intuition is of the heart. You just know something is true, and you may have. I don't have. Well, I've had a number of dramatic understandings, and I operate a lot on an intuitive basis, but not without reason. It's just if the intuition is there, even if the intuition is very strong, Swami Kriyananda could always make a bridge to reason. Even if the first impulse was not based on reason, you could always make a bridge to reason. I had a very radical idea once that I ended up executing, which had wide-ranging effects with Ananda. It appeared in my consciousness as a full-grown reality, but immediately the logic of it also expressed itself. And if the logic hadn't expressed itself, I would have been more suspicious of it, because it needs to be anchored. You can't just be sailing around all the time. The problem with the heart chakra also is that it's closer to the personal power and the lower chakras, and it's vulnerable. and then from the heart chakra, you go to the throat chakra, which is self-expression, communication, many things like this. The need to be heard, which is also required, and the need to be loved. This is what the heart is about. Everyone wants to be loved. So are we constantly seeking to be loved, or do we recognize that we are first loved by God, and that gives us the security, to love the world? Or am I always just needing this? The heart is also the home of what we call likes and dislikes. I want this, I don't want this. And you can see how that, again, how can we think clearly when only certain things are acceptable and others are terrifying? So the heart is very, very unreliable unless it's anchored in the spiritual eye. And the spiritual eye is also a dual chakra. This is something that Yogananda brought into the system of the chakras. The medulla here and the spiritual eye, this is the same chakra. This is the divine aspect of it. This is the limited aspect of it, the two opposites. Okay, Yogananda says when the sperm and ovum come together to make the first cell which makes the human body, which is our individuality. The Sanskrit word for our individuality, soul, is not a very clear word in English, and that's part of the confusion. Jiva is the word for our unique individuality. It is the unique bubble that is each one of us, that is always part of the sea, but nonetheless identifiable as the unique bubble. And the jiva, that individuality is present from first manifestation to God realization. Yogananda said he remembered himself as an individual all the way down to being a diamond. Yeah, like, wow. And all the steps in between, from being a diamond to a realized master, his individuality was present. I have a number of gemstones that I wear for astrological reasons. I wear them as a bangle. They don't show. I used to wear them on my hand. I had these 3 giant rings. I looked like a crazy king. I was in South Africa, and my host said to me, "Honey, somebody's going to knock you over for those rings. I think you should take them off." I pulled them off, so I wear them here. But I have several stones that I chose out of a basket of stones. I mean, I've acquired these over 30 years. I'm not as rich as they might make me look. But there were like maybe 10 yellow sapphires, and somebody just put them in my hand. Honestly, one of them said, "I'm yours, take me home." I mean, it had a personality. When I bought an emerald, it was the same. And I bought a diamond off of the internet. You can buy diamonds off of the internet because they're so controlled. So I'm looking at pictures of gemstones, and very expensive. It was a gift to me. I have to add that, just lest you misunderstand my status in life. I'm looking at gemstones on the internet, and I think, how am I ever going to figure this out? And so one day I just clicked in, and this stone came up that I had not seen before. It said, "I belong to you, buy me." I have no idea, except Yogananda said the individuality goes back all the way, and I love it. It came and I said, "Oh, honey, there you are," I'm a little sentimental, but it was very real. So there's this individuality. So when the sperm and ovum unite, Yogananda said, the first place is right here at the medulla. And this is apparently the only part of the body that they can't operate on. Yeah, if in any way, and I've been told this, that if they try to operate on it, because it's your life right there. And this becomes the jiva becomes identified with the individual body that it's going to inhabit. And the word is ego, but ego also is sometimes considered negative. Ego is just a fact. It is the infinite self identified with the limited conditions that I have embraced. And that first cell brings with it all the chakras. It brings with it the energy pattern. Bear in mind, energy doesn't take up any space. So it's not geography. And the first thing that happens, if you look at the little book that says Your Developing Embryo, have you ever looked at that little book? First thing that happens is something that looks like a matchstick. Because the first thing that happens is from the medulla, the chakras. The first thing that happens, because you know you can have no arms and no legs, and you're still all there. But if you go above that, you die from either the top or the bottom, because you have to have all that energy. Then the energy starts vibrating, and it vibrates uniquely to your consciousness, because each of those chakras, I never finished saying, represents a definition of reality. Just like when they woke up Corrie ten Boom, and she had to learn what is my reality. And I was saying the same with us. Every time you think, act, have a feeling, do anything, you are committing yourself to some level of reality that you think is true. And that registers in your chakras. And that's the energy pattern that you are, that you walk around being. And it draws to you certain things and it repels others, and it's constantly being changed. But when the child comes into the mother's womb, it makes this little matchstick, and then all the chakras are present, and they begin to vibrate, they begin to attract matter, and then the little baby grows. And the baby grows according to that pattern. Most of the time, it grows in a functional way, but sometimes the karma in the chakras causes it to develop either aberrations or not at all. You know, the karma just isn't there for birth, maybe for conception, but not for birth. You know, all of these different things. Okay, so the process of spiritual development is actually the distance from the medulla to here. Because this is individuality. This chakra is my individuality. And do I live identified with what makes me separate and limited, or do I shift my sense of individuality to be attuned with the infinite? That's why we call this the Christ center, the spiritual eye. So, Yogananda teaches us to meditate at the spiritual eye, because then it draws all the chakras into harmony with that reality. If you only meditate at the heart, which many people teach, you awaken your feeling nature, but it's too often then your life starts running basically from this chakra and not from this one. And your feeling is active, but it's your feeling tied to your limited identity instead of tied to your divine identity. And there's many other aspects about how the energy circulates and how karma is stored and all these things, which is why I'm sending you to the other place, to the YouTube channel. Absolutely enormously helpful, because once you get it in your mind, then you know everything else of what you're supposed to do. And the idea that your soul resides in your heart is I don't understand on what basis someone would say that. If you're going to, your soul, first of all, doesn't reside anywhere. And so because you do not leave the higher dimensions of reality merely because you're in a body. Your superconscious self, your infinite self, is untouched by being in a body, but we identify ourselves with limitation. You see the difference? We don't become limited, but we start thinking that we're limited. And that's why all you have to do is change your self-definition. You don't acquire anything. That's why the word is realization. What is it to realize something? It's not created in that moment. It's just like, oh, I didn't realize you were there, right? How often has that happened? They were always standing there, but, oh, I didn't realize it. That's exactly what it is with our infinite self, with the presence of God within us. I didn't realize you were there. You know, when it finally comes to us, it feels more like us than anything we've ever felt. This is why when people die and they're suddenly in this free divine realm and they're overwhelmed by the presence of God, how could I have forgotten this? One man who had that experience and then came back to what was his deathbed, he said, I can't quite see it anymore. It's just beyond my peripheral vision. But I know it's there. I just can't quite see it. But and the same question, how could I have ever forgotten? because we just get, and it happens to us lots of times in our lives, doesn't it? We get so obsessed. I can't exist without this job. I can't exist without this marriage. I can't exist without this house. We lose it. And then what do you know? We're still there. And we may discover a whole dimension of ourselves that we didn't even know was there. We realize, we awaken like that. So there's not, it's not like it's terrible to meditate here, but it's incomplete. And it's not as, the potential of it is not as great, and the potential confusion of it is greater. And to give a non-physical entity a physical location, and it's not even like our spirit resides here. This is the opening to it. This opens us and attunes us because of the way the energy flows. This is metaphysics. This isn't an opinion. The doctors don't say, well, I think, as for change, I don't think the breath goes through the heart. I think it goes through the elbow. And they say, well, no, it doesn't. And the teachings of the chakras are not anybody's opinion. They're the perception of those who have the experience, who then give it to us, share it with us.